So you join me for our Flight Sim special show this week, and managed to get someone from not just down the road or literally across the village, but from quite a way away. Welcome, Evan, onto the show. It's nice to see you in person rather than in the chat room.
That is true. It's nice to see you too. Hello, everyone.
So, Evan, we're getting together because we're going to have a chat and a discussion about flight sim. And obviously, you are a pilot yourself and an avid user of flight sims. So, we're going to kick things off with we're going to ask the question that, which platform do you use yourself, Evan?
Well, I'm a weird one. I have a foot in both camps. I'm an X-Plane 12 user, and I recently bought Flight Sim 2020. So I've both, and I use them for different reasons. So one of the reasons why I got back into simming after just like being a fun simmer when I was younger is actually to maintain IFR currency in my real flying. And X-Plane was really my choice for that. So I use that for doing approaches, doing IFR in bad weather, all that sort of stuff. And I recently bought Flight Sim 2020 when it was on special during, I think it was over Easter. It was on super special, and I thought, here's my chance. And I was actually really impressed at how it worked on my system, which is not a very high-end system at all. It's a very mid-tier system, and it looks gorgeous. So for VFR flying and scenic stuff and just to make cool screenshots, I use it for that and actually kind of like it.
Question is, Evan, did you? There's obviously different grades, isn't there, of Microsoft Flight Sim 2020? I think there's three packages
Yep.
you can get on that. Did you opt for the top?
I did,
Drawer?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Only because I fly. I'm lucky enough to have access to rent Cirruses in real life, so I wanted to check out the Cirruses, or the Cirrus in Flight Sim 2020, and you can only get that in the top tier. So when it was discounted, I thought, here's my chance. So and look, it's a lovely looking aircraft, and it works. It ticks all the boxes. It's not the most realistic, so I was a little bit unimpressed by that. But if you didn't know like them intimately, you'd probably think it's pretty good. But I have been also flying the G1000, 172, and some other planes just for fun, and they're pretty true to life. So your mileage may vary.
Yeah, I'm an X-Plane 11 heavy X-Plane 11 user. Last sort of few months got into X-Plane 12 after downloading that, and I love X-Plane 11. X-Plane 11 has been fantastic, and the software add-ons you can get, which we'll talk about later, are really good. But X-Plane 11 has been pretty much faultless, really, to be fair, in all the times
Yep.
I've used it. And with the hardware that I've got, again, we'll have a chat about the hardware and stuff later. But with the hardware that I use, it works really well with that. And the X-Plane 12, when it was announced, I was excited. I thought, yes, we're getting an upgrade. It's a bit like you're going to be like absolutely faultless. And they obviously released X-Plane a little bit too early in my eyes. I think they released it too soon. But it's good. The scenery is better. I wouldn't say it's perfect.
It is.
And obviously you can get the software add-ons and stuff for those to improve certain areas of the globe. But in all things, it was an improvement, definite improvement. But I did find myself, I know Stuart Aslett, who was hopefully going to join us today, but he can't make it, unfortunately. Stuart has said that, he found himself reverting back to X-Plane 11 to use that
Yep.
with the A320 that he uses to fly on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I am looking at changing to Microsoft Flight Sim soon, hopefully, to give it a try. Going to do a few test runs with some of the equipment I've got here first on someone else's home sim to see that they all work. But yeah, I think price point wise, Microsoft of coming at around the right area price wise, and having that three package that you can have, obviously, which I'm fairly sure that I reckon if you looked at Microsoft's sales, it would be surprised if many people opted for the basic stock pack and didn't go for the full in, all in
Right.
kind of package.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think the scenery wise, I mean, looking now at the kind of scenery that Microsoft Flight Sim offers, how would you compare that to like X-Plane 11 or X-Plane 12?
Well, X-Plane 11 wasn't fantastic. It was generated to be similar to real life. X-Plane 12 did improve on that. They put a lot more information from sources like OpenStreetMap and stuff like that. So it was an improvement. Um, and the trees were better and things like that. But it's still not perfect. The experience in Flight Sim 2020 is a lot better because I guess the textures and stuff on the ground is more closer to what you'd see from the air, at least, especially from sort of middle altitudes. Not if you're up in the flight levels, everything kind of looks the same, but middle altitudes where I live, 4,000 to say 10,000 feet above the ground, it looks pretty convincing to me. And they've done really well with the way the weather looks and stuff like that. So it's a very visually stunning platform. But I think there's a lot more new aircraft that have been developed by third parties that are now nudging the fidelity up to pretty close to the real thing. Like there's 737 sims and stuff that are really impressive, and I see a lot of streamers using those now.
Yeah, there's a lot of people on YouTube, isn't there, have
Mhm.
live channels using the
Yeah,
add-ons. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So it's I was pleasantly surprised by how well um, Flight Sim 2020 was able to run on my machine, because I thought that it was going to be an absolute monster and it would not be able to run very nicely. So kudos to the Asobo team for making it quite pretty, and even on because I think it automatically just put my settings into the middle. It made them. It looks quite stunning even at that level.
Obviously, I'm in the UK here. You're over in Australia. How are the scenery, or how is the scenery with Microsoft, especially? How does that look when you compare it to the airfields that you fly from in Australia?
They're a little bit behind. The airfield that I work at and fly from, Moorabbin in Melbourne, has had a lot of buildings built around it. They've sold off a lot of the adjacent land for commercial use. So there's a lot of warehouses and things that aren't present. One thing that did pop up in X-Plane 12 that wasn't really in X-Plane 11 was the golf courses. There's several golf courses around, and actually that helps a lot to orient you when you're in the circuit and stuff like that, because you know what to look for out and about. But they're certainly not perfectly up to date in terms of the airfield's progress. They're a little bit behind, but as a general rule, they're pretty good. Even the country airfields, I don't know what they're using to generate them, but they're convincing. So
So, given the two platforms, X-Plane 11, 12, depending on which one you use the most now, and Microsoft Flight Sim, what, in your eyes, Evan, given that choice now to stick with a platform and use it all the time, I'm guessing you're going to say Microsoft Flight Sim.
I'm going to use both. um, it depends on because I have got both loaded, and it depends on how I'm feeling and what I want to get out of that flight. If I really want to get serious and do approach, practice and bad weather stuff and come, arrive just at minimums and all the pressure that comes with that, I'll actually use X-Plane, because the add-ons that I've been able to get for that are very close to the real aircraft that I fly. I can't get that in Flight Sim 2020 at the moment. So for me, yeah, for that reason, I'll keep going with X-Plane 12. And I know that there's some more improvements coming with the weather and the cloud formations and stuff like that. So I'm keen to see what they do with that.
Yeah, well, I like I said, I'm X-Plane 11, 12 user, mainly X-Plane 11 to be fair. And like I said, I am hopefully going to transition onto to Microsoft Flight Sim. Fingers crossed, as long as all this hardware works behind me on it, if I try it out. So we'll see. I'm definitely looking forward to the enhanced visuals with Microsoft Flight Sim that you get with that with the airports, because I think obviously with X-Plane 11, X-Plane 12, you kind of, especially with X-Plane 11, you had to kind of buy the airport software add-ons to enhance the airports and stuff. And I think with Microsoft Flight Sim, which what I've seen, that the big regional, the big airports in and around the world are pretty much as they are in real life. I know Heathrow definitely does look very much like Heathrow T5 on Microsoft Flight Sim. And you can have that realism with a software add-on with X-Plane. But yeah, I shall look forward to it. I tell you, I really will look forward to it. One of the things I was going to ask actually, Evan, was is one of the things that I found, which I experimented with when I installed X-Plane 12, was I was installing the program onto my internal hard drive inside my PC. As yourself, you've got a tower PC that you use. One thing I found and researched and done a bit of info online and stuff about was a lot of people said that if you purchase an SSD drive, a high-speed solid-state drive, and installed purely just the actual program on there and ran from that it would improve the speed and the stability of the program. And this I brought here it's a little Samsung 1 terabyte SSD drive. It's tiny. It's literally probably the size of a credit card, slightly thicker. I installed X-Plane 12 on this, the entire program, and it runs a lot better, a lot quicker, and it boots up a lot quicker from the start as well. I found. I don't know whether you've experienced the same, whether you installed yours on an SSD drive or a standard hard drive.
Yeah, well, I was previously using X-Plane 11 on a laptop, and that had a moving drive, an old school spinning one.
Old school.
But since I built the Sim PC specifically for flying, I only have an M.2 drive, and that seems to be much quicker in every regard. So yeah, even though it was only slightly more expensive to get a solid state drive, it was definitely worth it.
Yeah, the price of these has definitely come down in the last kind of 2 or 3 years of the solid state drives, especially the small ones like this have come down quite a bit.
Yeah. I bought a drive just big enough to have the two Sims with all the things selected, and I don't use the PC for much else. So yeah, I didn't need to buy a ginormous one.
Hard drive, yeah. So we're going to move on to our thoughts on the issues that both platforms have had. Obviously, all software stuff like this has a issue when they normally release some beta versions first and then release the full versions like X-Plane 12 did. We'll talk about the scary one first, X-Plane 12. Obviously, it was a big announcement when they said that they were going to release this for everyone. I think everyone rushed out and brought, I think it was 70 or 80 pounds, I think in UK sterling.
Yep.
For the program, which I went out and got. And since then it's been a catalogue of enhancement upgrades, updates, it's been non-stop with X-Plane 12 to the point where I think the forum site was crashed at one point because so many people were complaining about the constant stuff that wasn't right, and a lot of it centered around clouds, funnily enough. And I know for you, Evan, because you do IFR flying as well, to have a degree of realism when you're flying in clouds is quite nice. But obviously, not being a Microsoft Flight Sim person myself yet, has there been that kind of issue with that platform?
Uh, it hasn't been without its issues, and I think the clouds in Microsoft Flight Simulator have been a little bit more uh, not realistic, but they've looked prettier from the get go. Whereas the X-Plane clouds have gone through various forms where they've tweaked the algorithm that creates them and spreads them out and all that sort of stuff, and it has improved, and sometimes they've tweaked it too much and it's gone a little backwards and stuff. So, but I was one of those people that went out and got the beta from day one. I watched the Flight Sim Expo lecture and then just waited until I could have a go. But look, largely, I think it's been on the improve the entire time, and I see that they're coming at the same problem from a totally different angle. And to come back to um, first first principles of physics and stuff, that's not easy stuff that they're doing. They're not taking the easy route. So so I give them I tip my hat for for doing it. But I think what I wanted to get out of it was the most realistic flight feeling. It didn't have to look exactly like, the real world, because most of the time I would set, average weather and then fly in the clouds. And, but since I've been connecting the flight sim up to online air traffic systems like VATSIM, they sort of want you to use real world weather. So it's been interesting to see how the two sims actually pull in the data from and then make it in the sim. So sometimes the weather in Melbourne is a little different in X-Plane versus Flight Sim 2020, because I think they pull the data from different sort of sources and mix it together differently. So I have been a little disappointed sometimes because there's not as many data points that they can pull from in Australia. In America, there's millions of METARs or METARs, as they would say, whereas there's only two nearby me that the sim has access to, and that means that it's sort of making it up from sort of only a little bit of information, whereas there's heaps of information in the States. So yeah, that is one downside. But
I was trying to think which weather service that X-Plane uses now for its real world weather. It's on the tip of my tongue. Met something.
Yeah,
there's a weather service that they use for the real world weather, and I
the
can't remember what it is now.
The NOAA, I think
They're normally actually X-Plane is normally fairly close to what it is actually here. If I choose to fly from Norwich, and I know because we're only about 20 minutes away from there, and it's overcast. If it's overcast here, it's going to be overcast there, and it generally tends to pick up on that overcast. And because we can obviously, as you do yourself, look at the weather reports from the specific airfields, you can see where the level of cloud cover is, and pretty much 10 times out of 10, it's spot on. It puts the cloud cover exactly at the same height it would be if you were flying from Norwich Airport here. So it is good in that regard.
Where it does struggle in X-Plane land is fronts. when they're coming through.
Yeah.
They can, whereas I've actually been pleasantly surprised with Flight Sim 2020. It seems to have, I don't know, it looks at where fronts are maybe visually from satellite data, and it seems to depict cold fronts and things like that a little more realistically. So whatever they're doing in that regard is pretty good.
So on a realism level, we talked about weather. Obviously, yourself being a well versed pilot of various aircraft, the different aircraft that you can get on the stock versions of both platforms and stuff. Would you say realism wise, obviously, because I've used this, to be fair, I've used the 7.3 more and I have the Cessna 150 or the 172, which is I should be really starting small and ending big. But for yourself, obviously you fly the Cirrus.
Yep.
How for you, how close or how good are they between the real life and the sim?
Neither of them, neither platforms have it perfect. Um, I was a little bit disappointed in the Microsoft Flight Simulator one. That is seems to be a little bit half baked. I know that they've got other aircraft and stuff, so can't expect everything to be perfect. It's a melding of a couple of different ages of Cirruses, which in my mind, because I'm a mechanic, I work on them every day, so I know all of the different generations and stuff, and it's got the interior from one generation and the exterior from another generation, the undercarriage from a different jet, so yeah, that sort of pulls me out of the realism a little bit, but it does work. The G1000 in the Flight Sim version that is missing a few features that the G1000 in the real life does. But look, it has all of the basics. You can fly, you can do IFR stuff. It just doesn't have all of the sort of specialist features in IFR. But in X-Plane, the SR22 is pretty good. It's a little newer in its they're trying to model the G6, which is the latest edition. But I don't fly the latest ones. I fly a Generation 3 with Avidyne Avionics. And for that, I actually found a product by TalkSim, and they make SR20, SR22s both in the G1000, but also in the Avidyne system. So they've modeled those really impressively well. So shout out to those guys because they're really keen to dial it in and make it real. So if you find something that's a bit out of ordinary, you can here it is in real life. Here you go, guys, and they'll make it happen in their model of the aircraft. So they're really good like that, and that's been really good because I've practiced heaps of stuff that I was okay with during my training for IFR, but cementing it, doing it over and over again in the sim has just made it so much better.
Yeah, one of the things I found when I started using X-Plane was the original X-Plane 11 was that I done pretty much all my training in a 1967 Cessna 152, which was as basic as you could possibly get. And I know that the 150 or the 150 152 on X-Plane was kind of a lot newer version, a very a very upgraded version of the 150. Yep. The most of the stuff was the same. A lot of the instruments and controls and stuff were the same, but there were a few bits that I wouldn't have the first idea what I'm doing with because it wasn't there when I was training. So I did kind of think it would have been nice if they would have done possibly like an original kind of old school 150, and even to have the instrument panel shaking and vibrating when you're taxiing would be quite good as well. But but on the whole, they done well with that. And as we're
Yeah,
just saying, in my view on the 7.3 was that they X-Plane done a really good job with the stock version of the 7.3 on X-Plane, and then obviously the Zevo guys came along and brought their own version of the
yeah,
737 on, which was enhanced, had more functionality with a lot of the switches that didn't do anything on the stock
yep.
version, um, and looked really good. Now we have got a guest joining us. Bear with me. I'm going to bring our fellow co-host onto the show. He's just joined us. It's very early over in the US, but I can confirm Armando has joined us. Hello.
Good morning, guys. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
Very good. We're in full flow. We're in full flow, Armando. Chatting. We're just talking about the how accurate the flight sims are, as in the aircraft types are on both platforms in in regards to the real world. Evan's talking about the SR-22 because he flies SR-22, but
Yeah, that's
obviously,
my main.
but Evan was just saying that it's nearly there, but some aspects are different to real world. And I think you've said, Armando, before that some of the aircraft that you fly you're used to are different slightly with the sim platforms.
Yeah, exactly. And I couldn't agree more. One of the reasons, and I'll get into, we'll kind of do this backwards where I'll talk a little bit about my experience with flight simulators, but I've been there since the beginning, right? Since the original Chicago MIGS days on Microsoft Flight Simulator, with the the what do they call it? All the angular graphics, because they like 16-bit graphics because they couldn't do it any other way. But yeah, I've used simulators for learning new airplanes and then keeping up proficiency. Um, and I agree perfectly with they're all almost there in that. For example, I fly the Pilatus quite a bit, and over the years they've done some really great versions of it. Coronado did a really great version, probably the most popular one of the Pilatus PC-12. But like, there's always something that's just a little bit off. Either a autopilot function or something that, like, so for example, now in the Hawker jet, when I transitioned to the jet, I really wanted to get something with a ProLine 21 system in Microsoft Flight Simulator or X-Plane 11, just so I can get used to the buttonology of the FMS before going to my initial training. And again, everything was just right, like 90% there, except for maybe an accurate VNAV function or an accurate direct to function on the box type thing. So yeah, they're all almost always right there.
So we were chatting earlier, Armando, about our preferred platform. Obviously, most of us started, I think, on X-Plane because it was probably the first one that was. Well, I'll say first one. Microsoft was there as well with the original Microsoft Flight Sim many years ago. But I think over the last few years, especially since lockdown, more and more people have been flying home sims, and X-Plane was my go-to. Evan is a kind of mix between the two, but I think, Armando, I'm right in thinking you're an X-Plane aficionado first, but now you're Microsoft Flight Simming.
Well, I was on Microsoft Flight Simulator 10 or X, whatever the actual name is, for years, for as long as it was out. And then I went over to X-Plane because I thought X-Plane 11 was pretty revolutionary, with the flight modeling and the graphics. And then shortly after X-Plane 12 came out, I went straight to X-Plane 12, but then I just couldn't. Once Microsoft 2020 came out, that I don't think X-Plane can match it, unfortunately. So I'm actually in a Microsoft MSFS 2020 now.
Ah.
But let me bring this up real quick. There is now this was a survey that was done last year, so it was 2022 survey, and they went through, and I'd like to talk about some of these numbers that they actually came up with. because it goes into peripherals, virtual reality. And then some of the numbers that I picked out of here was how many real pilots are flight simmers also. But specific to this question, in 2022's Navigraph survey, it was 67% MSFS 2020. So X-Plane 11 was right around 23% of users, and X-Plane 12 right around 19% of users. So at least last year, it was far and away Microsoft 2020.
Yeah,
and there's some other.
we were talking. I was talking Armando about just before you came on about the realism levels of the scenery, like the weather as well, especially the weather, because Evan does a lot of IFR flying stuff like that. And we're saying how obviously with Microsoft Flight Sim when that came out, the whole big selling point of Microsoft Flight Sim when it came out was that the scenery and the weather was going to be amazing, which it is. It does look absolutely fantastic. But then with X-Plane 12, they said that they were going to improve obviously the scenery and the weather and stuff. And they've kind of been hit and miss with what they've brought to the table as such. I think, Evan, you were saying that there are certain aspects of both platforms which could be enhanced in regards to weather.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One thing that both have pretty well that I've noticed is the winds. The real world winds are usually pretty darn good.
Is that the same? Would you think, Armando, you'd say that they're both on a level or slightly?
I do think they're actually really good, especially it sounds like Evan and I use it kind of similarly for proficiency, and kind of buttonology, especially the Cirrus has a perspective system, right, which is essentially a G1000.
Correct.
So that takes a lot of buttonology. So I think Evan and I seem to use it for really the same purposes.
I'll just bugger about.
What's funny about that? Let me come back to that. But the wins in the sim are great. It's some of the aftermarket flight models for the aircraft on how they respond to the winds that are lacking somewhere. And usually I think those are third-party aircraft. Some of the native aircraft to the platforms also. Sometimes they tweak them and they send the updates, but some of the third-party add-ons sometimes don't really respond well to wind shifts, or that's really where you notice where there's a programmed wind layer, and then there's a shift in wind direction and speed programmed above that. As you're transitioning between those two, some of the third-party aircraft flight models will go bananas, like you just flew off the Niagara Falls or something like that.
I found that with the Zebo mod on X-Plane. It was a bit dubious when flying with changing winds. The stock version was actually quite good, but I thought the Zebo mod, even though it is a fantastic addition to X-Plane, does have a few little niggly bits, which
well, Evan, you'll appreciate this. So when Carlos visited here in what was it, June?
May. June, May.
I don't know.
May.
Couple months ago now. I actually asked him that question because he's got such a great sim set. I'm sure you guys probably already talked about sim setups, but he's got this great sim setup. And I said, "Oh, Carlos, this is great because I can teach you about standard instrument departures. I can tell you about arrival procedures, and let's talk numbers. Let's get into the box. Let's talk some performance things into the 737 that you're always flying. Have you ever flown, a VNAV arrival into LAX? Because that's fun to me." And Carlos, for an entire week, managed to avoid me, and we never talked simulators. We never jumped on the sim here. And I've even offered to be like a fake ATC, right? So we'll talk about Pilot Edge.
We'll do that. We'll do that.
But he successfully avoided me for an entire week on just not actually learning how a 737 works. But you're exactly right, Evan. That's the majority of users are actually just here for fun, and sometimes I forget that.
I will
No.
say, even though when I first started, I did before I had all the stuff here behind me, and I was just literally using the original Satec yoke and stuff like that. It was literally just turn it on 7.3, appear at the threshold to 27 left on the runway, ready to take off, fly around, land, blah, blah. But I will say that since I invested, or should I say, my wife invested heavily on bits and pieces for me, I am now in what I did do when I got this stuff. I printed out the entire the 7.3 NG manual, startup manual, and I do now spawn at the gate with nothing. The airplane's cold, and I run through all the start procedures, and you have to look around the flight decks and turn the pumps on and do the engine ignition start, all that kind of stuff. And I enjoy that now. That's a whole part of. I mean, it's what a pilot does anyway in the real world. So why not do that yourself, albeit on the sim?
Yeah, and there's a lot of learning to be done there. I think you have a lot of private pilots, as well as a lot of aviation enthusiasts that enjoy flying on real aircraft. And I think all of us are sitting there, looking down the aisle, seeing what switches are being flipped over there, and we know, you know, I'm feeling that all three of us would be on an Airbus A321, and when it starts going, whoa, wiggle, 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 right, when the hydraulic pumps are equalizing, I think all three of us would probably lean to the person next to us and go, "It's normal," right? Like we're those people. So I think a simulator is a great way to learn more about aircraft. Or you can go ancient, right? So like, what I think it was Microsoft 2020 that came out with a DC-9 or an MD-80,
yeah,
right? And all of us were trying to figure out how Captain Jeff flew this ancient thing. We're like, oh, so that's the celestial navigation port up there. Okay, there's that one. It's great to learn about systems, and just really how airplanes work.
So I think we'll talk. We'll talk about the hardware bit next, and just sort of go through. Obviously, having a home sim is great, but we all know that using a mouse to control an aircraft and a keyboard is about as much fun as boiling an egg. So I think most people have spent a ridiculous amount of money on hardware stuff to go with the aircraft. Evan, I know you've got your bits and pieces plugged in, so you can't just rip them out and and show
Sorry.
us. But Armando, what bits have you got for your home sim? Obviously, I've seen them myself, but what pieces of hardware have you got invested in?
So when you and I met, Carlos, I had my sim set up in the basement of my house there in the UK, and I started out with just a big 55-inch television, as most Americans have, and that's a small TV in America, right? 55-inch, and then I had the old school CH products, rudder pedals, and and throttles, and then I think I had a Cytec yoke. I ended up getting rid of all that and took a break from it as I was working at the airlines, because it was one of those situations where I spent a year at an airline and the last thing I wanted to do was come home and fly. Um, Once I left the airline and came back into corporate and not flying as much, top to bottom, I've got a curved monitor. It's a 36-inch curved monitor, which does really great with Microsoft 2020. On the right side, I use a Honeycomb Bravo throttle quadrant. What I really like about did we send a disclaimer that this is not paid advertising by any of these people? But I really like the Honeycomb Bravo throttle quadrant because they can pretty easily switch back and forth between the jet and general aviation. So if I do want to go fly a Cirrus or throw some Cub controls or maybe switch back and forth between the Pilatus, the Honeycomb Bravo comes with accessories for a 4-engine commercial jet, as well as a twin-engine turboprop or you can go all the way down to a single engine general aviation piston aircraft. And all those levers are actually included in the kit when you buy it, and they just pop out and pop back in. But so currently I have the Honeycomb Bravo. The functionality of the mode control panel is pretty limited in Microsoft 2020 right now. I think they're working on some mapping issues. Then I've got a Thrustmaster TCA Boeing yoke.
So cool.
Yeah, it's a pretty big piece of clunky equipment, but I have found that it is actually the most accurate at duplicating the feeling of a yoke that's floor mounted. So if you guys look that up on the internet, it's the way it's built, it kind of hangs off your desk, takes up a lot of real estate on your desk, but then it really does a good job of emulating something that's mounted on the floor, as opposed to most traditional sim yokes, which would be more akin to a general aviation aircraft, except for the Cirrus, of course. And then as a backup to the backup, I've got a Thrustmaster stick. So that's my setup,
which is awesome. I have seen that Boeing yoke is so good. I know Stuart O'Neill has just invested in one himself at home with the throttle add-on as well for that Boeing yoke he's got as well, which he's desperate for me to come around and see. But
yeah, they're not cheap.
They're not cheap. They're not cheap.
Yeah.
And talking of not cheap, I have grabbed the stuff from the sim cupboard. So most of you who watch the show would have seen the center pedestal or the throttle quadrant segment here that I got a few years back here, which works really well. It's not motorized because the motorized version is incredibly expensive, but everything works. The trim wheels work, all the switches and everything work, engine cutoff switches, and all the electric, the stab control, cutoff switches, everything work. Speed brake, rudder, and the throttles also has the toga switches on here and the throttle disconnect as well. And it is literally plug and play. It's that easy to set up. There's few companies making these online now. I have noticed that since we got this one, that there are now a number of companies that are making these online now, and the prices do vary really, really quite a lot. So it's worth looking in when you're, looking at getting these. But really good bit of kit if you're flying the 7.3. Another good piece of kit as well, which I mounted on the, I think you've probably all seen the original SATAC ones here before. There we go. If I'll put it there, it's probably best, isn't it? Yeah, that SATAC one there, which I think most people have seen those. You can get those cheap enough on eBay.
For the audio version, he's got that mode control panel on there.
That's it, the mode control panel with the gear and the various switches or instrument switches on there as well. And the MCP panel on top, which came from Core Flight Technologies, which is again a plug and play one. But like I was saying to Evan earlier, this works brilliantly with the Zebo mod on X-Plane, but doesn't work 100% with the stock version of the 737 on X-Plane. But with this at night lit up, because all the panels lit up backlit, the buttons are backlit, and all the digital displays all work on this, and it does look really good. But that's another good addition, I think, is well worth. And I know that Stuart wants to try this on his home setup. And pedals wise, there we go. I know Evan's got these himself. The SATAC pedals, which are stock, they're okay. They're not too bad. I know Armando. I think you've got the which ones have you got? Is it the CH ones you've got?
I've got the Pro pedals, yeah.
The Pro pedals, yeah, which I think are a little bit more, have a bit more realism to them, I think. And then one of the latest additions I got last year was the Honeycomb joystick, which is again not cheap. It's probably one of the more higher end control yokes, but has there's switches on as well, switch panel on there as well, and is a good learner for like flying the Cessna 150 because you have got all the mag switches and stuff on here, so you can fiddle around and stuff. It's a great little, and it's also the feedback is great on this. I think it's compared to the original SATAC version that I had when I started. This is by far superior. I don't know if you have had any experience with those at all, Evan, with the honeycomb ones.
I tested them when they first came out at an Oshkosh one year, and I was really impressed.
Yeah, it's good. You could spend a huge amount of money on hardware for flight sim.
Yep.
I've seen online. I mean, you can purchase not just the MCP panels. You can purchase like the FMS computer part of it as well. A lot of the companies will do those. And I see online there's also a company that does an entire overhead panel for the 737, which apparently is plug and play and is pretty much 100% functional, on the sim. But given, I suppose, a question is, given the money is no object answer, Armando, I'm guessing you'd probably sort of convert a whole room into a fixed space sim at home if you had the choice chance.
I mean, if money was no object, sure. It's interesting to me that the 737 is such a popular choice for flight simming, and the parts that are manufactured, the aftermarket parts for manufacturing that's pretty impressive, I guess. But I don't know that the 737 would be my first choice at setting up a full room simulator. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know what I would do, but I think I would go for something classic, like a DC-3 or something.
Oh yeah,
I don't think I've seen a company manufacturing DC-3 sim, but I mean, companies could go massive. You could have companies doing all manner of different aircraft, but the market would be so flooded with stuff. I think you'd have too much choice. Well,
but when I was up when I was working and flying a DC-3 up at Basler Aircraft, they gut out all the original parts of the DC-3s and build their own Basler BT-67. And I was walking around their hangar, where it's not even a hangar, it's a storage barn, like an actual barn. If you've been to Oshkosh, like one of those big red barns, it's just full of airplane parts, which is where I got that propeller blade. And I was just like a kid in a candy store thinking, oh my gosh, I could take all of these parts and make a killer sim at home. It would take so much wiring, but you could probably do it. And I may have missed it, but Evan, what's your setup? What do you?
Mine's really, really actually simple. It's all Logitech, and it's the same joystick. I can't quite reach.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Logitech Attack 3 that I have had for 15, maybe more years. It's just a simple left or right-handed joystick with a few buttons and a little sort of flippy thing for a throttle. But that's what I started with, and then I've added the rudder pedals, same as Carlos's, and the Logitech throttle quadrant, which is just basically the three little things for power, propeller, and mixture. But I modified one of the things. It comes with one that's like 4 together, so you can connect several. But I've cut mine in half, so it only takes 2. So for the Cirrus, you've only got a power lever and a mixture that comes off. And so I just use those on mine. I wish I could show you, but I've bolted it to the
What is an audio podcast? So
it is an audio, but exactly, yeah. But what would you say then, guys, that if you are able to make that investment, that you'd say that it would be important to have the hardware, the good hardware add-ons that are available?
I think it's important to start somewhere. You don't need to buy the absolute best to get going. Buying a joystick, even if it's a introductory one, uh, increases the immersion considerably straight away. And a lot of them have a little throttle thing that you can start using that. That helps. But yeah, having for me, having the throttle in the correct hand and the joystick in the correct hand helps a lot, just for sort of practicing approaches and things like that.
What about you, Armando?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we're going over the cusp now for VR. I have flown with VR goggles a couple times now, and actually, the systems integration training, so the sit portion of when I went to the airline was actually done in a simulator with X-Plane 11, Pilatus, and X-Plane 11, a Coronado Pilatus add-on. Very basic controls, but then everything was with VR goggles. And on at least on last year's survey, the HTC Reverb G2 was 40% of users that were using VR, and then the Oculus Quest 2 and the Oculus Rift were the Quest was at 25% of users, give or take, and the Oculus Rift was right around 12% of users. So I think when you're talking immersive experiences, and Carlos, we've done stories on the show about the Air Force actually going both at the Air Force Academy and Air Force Undergraduate Pilot Training 2.5, where they are using VR goggles and essentially X-Plane to get a lot of those maneuvers and that muscle memory that Evan is talking about for 100 hours before the students step into the real aircraft, and it has reduced training times. I forget what the number, but it was significant. It was like 30% when we did that article a couple months ago on the show. So I believe in it. I think a lot of people, especially a lot of real world pilots, tend to laugh at simmers. I do believe in it, and you can't go wrong if world air forces and airlines are actually also using these kinds of the same thing that all three of us are using at our home to really develop those flows, those emergency action muscle memory items. But one thing that we didn't talk about, which is probably the most expensive part of hardware, Carlos, is the computer.
Oh yes,
right. And there was a revolution in that. Well, maybe not a revolution. There was a leap in that with Microsoft 2020 X-Plane 12. Now we're starting to need some pretty significant graphics processing. So for me, I purposely for X-Plane 12, I ended up buying an MSI gaming computer with an i7 processor, 2 gig processor, which is probably on the low end now of gaming computers. And my video card in there is NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060. So that's essentially for VR, it's the lowest one. I think the 1060 had some VR function, but the 3060 is a little bit better. And that's another one. Another graphics cards was actually one of these survey questions. And let me look that up real quick. What are you guys using for computers?
I'm the same as you, Armando. I've got the MSI gaming tower with, I forget which graphics card is in there now. It's the same, similar one to yours, I think, similar brand to yours, Armando, graphics card wise. But I think it's 3.1 gigahertz i7 processor in here. Runs really well. I was saying to Evan earlier on, runs really well. Runs X-Plane 12 in nearly full, everything turned up to the absolute top end. I was saying to Evan, the biggest issue I think with when you start to get the more higher power processors to run things like X-Plane 12 and Microsoft Flight Sim is cooling. Cooling is key. because things do get rather warm, as we all know with PCs. I don't know whether that's an issue you have with yours, Armando, when you're running things.
Well, I'm similar to you. I bought a gaming tower, so not anymore. And mine actually has liquid cooling. So
there we go.
I'm not a gamer. Well, the funny part about this is I'm not a gamer at all. I have no video games. I have, I don't have Call of Duty. I don't have anything else on my computer. My computer is literally for podcasting and then flight simming. Yeah, so I'm looking at the graphics cards on the survey. For most users, well, 83% of users have an NVIDIA graphics card.
Yeah.
I love this answer. 8.4% of users responded with an AMD graphics card. 2.9 had an Intel graphics card, and 6.4 of respondents said, "I don't know." So that's I actually had to look up what I had. But in the survey of the NVIDIA users, the RTX 2080 and 1080 were the most popular ones in 2021. But then as these things evolved, the 3080 had 17% of users, the RTX 3070 at 10%. And on the AMD side of the house, the Radeon 5700 is the most used graphics card. And that's for, mostly Microsoft 2020 users, which I think was probably a little bit more graphics intense than X-Plane, but X-Plane 12 is right there along with it.
So software wise, obviously we use a two-pole. We'll start to hopefully use Microsoft soon, but with the two platforms, you can obviously get the stock versions. And like me and Evan was saying earlier, Armando, with Microsoft Flight Sim, you've got 3 different options. So kind of package options of Microsoft Flight Sim. There's the basic version, a mid-range version, then there's the top, all singing and dancing version. But obviously, software add-ons is quite a big thing, and there are a whole heap of companies out there doing software add-ons for both platforms. Some better than others. Some of the good ones are good with a good price for a good reason. But is that something for me? I mean, I've downloaded probably most of the UK and some of the US add-on software add-ons for various airports and areas. And the UK, I've added like the southeast, east, and southeast versions of the ground, kind of the trees and all the kind of geo add-on bits and pieces. But is that something you've invested in heavily with your guys' Sims, or have you kept it stock with the original?
I'm interested to hear from Evan because he lives in a beautiful country, so I'm interested in the graphics.
I was going to say the add-ons for Australia must be huge.
Yes, there's a lot of Australia. Talking just X-Plane 11, I used to get into all of the extra scenery add-ons and all that sort of stuff. But since moving to X-Plane 12, I haven't really played with them much at all. The only thing I have played with is a thing called Auto Ortho, which is a system that pulls in tiles from either Google Maps or Bing Maps or whatever to sort of make it similar in like Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, whereas it's reusing real tiles to lay on the ground. And it was okay, but it's certainly not something that's ready for prime time. It looked great in the country. The cities looked a little bit. So I've kept X-Plane 12 absolutely stock, just so I can see the progression as they've improved it over the last little while. And I bought my first upgrade to Flight Sim 2020, which was just the Melbourne airport. Sorry, the Melbourne upgrade, not just Melbourne airport, but yeah. And that's it. So I haven't really done much in that side of modding lately. Mostly purchased the TalkSim SR20 and SR22s. I bought a little application to get FlightSim 2020 to talk to my EFB, so I can run it on my iPad, which is similar to your
ForeFlight.
What's it called? Yeah, ForeFlight or
Skydemon.
Yours? Skydemon, that's the one.
Yeah.
So there was a little application called XMapsy that acts as a go-between between the two. And I used Navigraph to keep the nav data up to date in both sims. So when I go on to the ATC systems, I'm using the latest waypoints and all that sort of stuff, and there's no embarrassments there. But one little piece of software that I did purchase, and it's actually
this is so good, Armando. If you've not seen this yet, I did not know about this until Evan showed me, and it looks awesome. I shall be downloading this.
Yeah. So this is this straddles between software and hardware, because I'm just using an old iPad for this person, but it can be used on another, like on a PC or on a Android tablet or something. But this is called what is it called?
Air Manager.
Air Manager. That's it. And you can put together panels. I put this one together, or you can select other panels, and they're touch screen.
Look at that.
And you can have it running on a device, and I have that down beside or just below my screen. So I have a little avionics stack that I can access at any time. So all the basic things that even if I look around on screen, I can still access the autopilot, flaps, parking brake, transponder, and comm stack. So
I wrote it down. Air Manager. I like it.
I like it. I do like that, because Cytec, is it Cytec or Logitech, did do the little hardware add-ons, didn't they, for the displays, which are really good. They do look really good. I've seen them in action, but they're not cheap. They're about 120, 150 pounds they are to buy each. But that is a really good.
This has really helped my immersion, because I have it in a spot that's very close to where it is in the real cockpit. So my sort of flow is similar, not perfect, but similar. So yeah, shout out to those guys.
So talking of navigation, we're just touched on there. Skydemon for me on the Android pad I have, and Armando, I know you use a is it
I use ForeFlight.
ForeFlight, that's it.
Yeah.
But do they with Skydemon on the tablet, they do link directly with X-Plane? I'm guessing, is that the same with yours, Armando?
Yeah, ForeFlight links directly to X-Plane 12 and 11. For Microsoft 2020 to run it on ForeFlight, I actually use a flight events client. It's just an extra little thing that runs in the background, doesn't intrude on anything, but that's punching or pushing the all of your nav data over to your iPad. And kind of like I was alluding to, what I use my sim for mostly is for proficiency, but then I fly a lot of the flights that I'm about to go fly in the sim. I fly them at the speeds that I'm supposed to fly. And so, when you're flying SIDS and stars in a jet, there are speed restrictions, altitude restrictions. There are a lot of considerations that go into not breaking rules. And for me, I like to get into the FMS and then fly those things with the VNAV functions and the actual speed restrictions and all that. So I use ForeFlight quite a bit using the FMS. And then as far as like Evan, I use Navigraph to keep all my charts updated. And that I use mostly for X-Plane 12. And then we're gonna talk about realism here in a second, but Pilot Edge, right? So I don't know what ATC simulate or add-on you use, Evan, but for me, Pilot Edge was huge for years, and I was one of the early adopters of Pilot Edge.
Yeah, I would love to. I haven't actually dipped my toe into Pilot Edge itself because it's an American product. But I use a global product that's it's more volunteer based, and it's called VATSIM.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
similar thing, but just coming at it from a volunteer sort of background. But all of the controllers and everyone that I've sort of come in contact with have treated it like the real thing, followed procedures, done everything, and it was great for me because switching my brain when I was training IFR, switching my brain between VFR and IFR brain, I struggled with a little bit to talk IFR and then to talk VFR when it was appropriate. So
you're not alone.
Practicing that online when there's a real human being on the other end that you can embarrass yourself in front of. But also, by the same token, it's not the end of the world if you do, say something a little bit silly. You can fix it and move on and stuff. And that helped me a lot. So I really enjoy using VATSIM.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard is VATSIM is a little bit more forgiving than Pilot Edge. Now, last year on the show, we had a representative from Pilot Edge on PTUK talking about SimVenture, right? And the arrival into Oshkosh, the FISC arrival into Oshkosh, or the notice is important. And I was actually listening to Opposing Bases and their show last week with one of the Oshkosh controllers, Bravo Kilo, and they're talking about how most pilots, 95% of pilots read it, then they read it again, then they read it again, they then read it again. It's 16 pages or something like that. And then they practice it, and then they practice it, and then they practice it at home. They practice flying the aircraft at 90 knots, right? For me, in the Cub, I'm full throttle at 90 knots. For Evan, flying to Cirrus at 90 knots, actually kind of challenging, right? So you're trying to intermingle all this traffic. And they were, BK was talking about how most pilots really, really practice. And then SimVenture, which is something put on by Pilot Edge, allows you in a non-threatening environment to practice the full arrival into Oshkosh VFR with things like X-Plane 12s, the ortho, what was it? Ortho tile? Ortho?
Ortho or
auto ortho,
yes,
yeah. Yeah, but really kind of like you were saying, in Microsoft 2020, you don't need any of that. It's so accurate to probably a 3-meter visual level, acuity level, or accuracy, 3-meter visual accuracy, where you can actually fly the full arrival. And this year they extended the Oshkosh arrival way out. Now there's 3 VFR points or GPS points and VFR points all the way out to Green Lake. But these sims are so accurate at reproducing the shoreline and this building and the gravel pit and this 6-lane highway that with Pilot Edge and SimVenture, you can fly this a dozen times with an actual controller saying, hey, blue and white, low wing, Cirrus, rock your wings, good rock, because they can see it on their screen, on the controller screen. And then practice, your downwind and your base leg to whatever runway. So it's just a great way to some of these add-ons take it next level realism for an instrument student or an instrument pilot. Pilot Edge is a huge, and again, we're not being sponsored by Pilot Edge or anything like that, but being able to get into your virtual cockpit and get that clearance, which is one of the hardest parts, right? And get a departure and fly in the instrument airspace world, and if you do get something wrong, they'll gently correct you as opposed to doing it in real world where you don't want to get it wrong and then possibly get a pilot deviation.
But it's also the workload and work cycles that you have to go through. And when you add in, as well as operating the aircraft, the communications to it, it ups the ante in terms of how much your brain has to be ahead of the aircraft.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what are we going to move on to next, Armando? Have you got another subject to talk about on the sim world?
Well, one of the things for me that I want to just talk, my personal experience was it's helped me immensely. When I lived in the UK, I started as a fun flyer on simulator, Microsoft Flight Simulator. But Carlos, this actually may surprise you, but we didn't fly a whole lot in the UK instrument because everything was so controlled. It was this weird mix of like VFR, but talking to the military controllers. We didn't really fly in the UK airspace system under instrument flight rules because we were always being managed by London military or Scottish military control. For me, since I knew I was in the sunset of my career, I really wanted to keep up on instrument procedures back here in the US. So when I was over there in the UK, and my family was here in the US, so I could get off of work get home at 5 in the afternoon, grab some dinner, and then I would be on a simulator from 7 to 10 or 11 p.m. And for me, it was instrument proficiency. That's one thing that's always been fun to me. I've always enjoyed instrument flying, the challenge of it, the challenge of navigating a aluminum tube around the skies and then ending up where you're supposed to be on a final approach fixers or a missed approach point, and seeing the runway lights. That's huge. It's like I don't know, it's like popping a pimple. It just feels great. The So for me, a lot of my flying was instrument flying, instrument proficiency when I was over there in the UK, and X-Plane 11 was more than enough for that. But then when I started transitioning into these new airplanes, there's so much realism that you're really, really able to get ahead of your peers when you go to training, especially your older colleagues. So all three of us are relatively young, especially in corporate flying. There's a lot of folks in their in their 60s and maybe even their 70s. So with us tech savvy individuals, you can really get on a simulator with some of these add-ons that we've talked about and really get a step ahead, because that's not a situation where that you want to mess up. You don't want to get behind on class. It costs a lot of money. Type rating, my Hawker type rating was close to $60,000. So it's not a situation. I didn't pay for that, by the way, the company pays for it. But some of the Gulfstream type ratings are upwards of $80,000 and $90,000, and this is just a great way to show up ready and prepared. If you mix this with getting into the books, or if you're at the beginning of your career, like Evan is talking about, really get those instrument procedures. When I was on the hiring team for my airline, that was, I would say, my number one weakness that I would identify in pilot candidates was instrument knowledge and instrument general knowledge and procedures, even things like reading a chart. So simulators are a great way if you're about to go interview for a job to immerse yourself, fly, know the difference between decision height and an MDA, a minimum decision altitude, fly missed approaches, because a lot of the companies will put you into a simulator as part of your job interview. When you're talking about small cargo carriers or Part 135 operators here, you're probably going to find yourself on Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 with some basic peripherals, and it's going to be part of your job interview to see how you can fly an instrument departure, an arrival, an approach, and a missed approach. And if it's a multi-engine aircraft, they're probably going to want you to do a single engine missed approach. Even on a PC in a conference room, they're able to see the pilot candidates' flows and their ability to manage both comms and systems. It's exactly what Evan's talking about, where it could be the difference between you getting the job and somebody else getting the job. Your familiarity and your comfort with a flight simulator.
You're saying about how that helps with learning, well, with flying using a sim and stuff. I'll tell you what is a big help is I struggled for a while with learning how to program the FMS system on the 7.3. It's quite, it's not as easy just punching a few buttons and everything does it for you. You have to put stuff in correctly. One of the greatest things I found help wise was instructional videos on YouTube. There are quite a few really serious simmers who have some great videos on there, which teach you in quite in-depth detail how to use the various systems on say the Microsoft Flight Sim aircraft, and also the 7.3 on X-Plane. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm.
How long did it take you to figure out that you have to close the flight plan before you can put in? It probably took you a couple of weeks to figure out, or Googling like, oh, I got to close the flight. What does closed flight plan mean? Because it won't let you put in an arrival or an instrument approach if you haven't closed the flight plan. That's that all big jet FMSs are pretty much the same until you get into the Garmin G3000, G5000 automation. You got to close the flight plan. Most people don't know that. You wouldn't know that unless you've gone to training in the airplane.
So actually, on that note, with both you guys, obviously using the Garmin systems, because I think what's the system on the PC-12 you use? Is it a Garmin?
So the legacy PC-12s have mostly moved to a Garmin GTN 650, GTN 750 combination. Those are readily available for the flight sims. The newer PC-12s is a Honeywell Primus Apex system, which I believe Coronado is working on an NG PC-12. But for me, in the jet, it's the Honeywell ProLine 21 system, which there's no Hawker add-on yet. There was a company that was working on one. I think they put it on the back burner. So for me, I actually fly as the stock Citation CJ4 on Microsoft 2020, and it's about the same speed, size, and buttonology as the Hawker jet. But the Cirrus Perspective, again, it's essentially a Garmin G1000 system. How have you discovered the similarities? Have good habits, bad habits?
Oh, they're pretty good. But most of my flying is actually with a previous system to that, with the Garmin 430.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so it's actually, for me, it was using those old GPS units, but they still work, they still go.
Yeah.
And the Avidyne PFD and MFD. So yeah, that's most of my time. IFR has been in that setup. So yeah, getting a good version of the Garmin 430 was important to me.
How accurate are they, guys, though, to the real thing? You obviously with the Garmin setup with the SR22 and the SR22 sim on X-Plane, say, is the functionality there to the real thing?
It's pretty close. It's pretty close these days. Yeah, the standard one in Flight Sim 2020 is a little bit cut down. It has the basics, but none of the special features. But yeah, if you get an aftermarket one like TalkSim make, they get into more of the VNav stuff and some of the more sort of in-depth features of the Garmin suite.
What about you, Armando? Are they very well set up with the system you use?
Yeah, again, it's kind of 90% there. It's funny that Evan says the VNAV function. The VNAV function is another area that it's probably the one of the weakest. So in this survey, also they tried to figure out what the sim pilots struggled with most as opposed to real pilots using a sim, and they said the top areas that simmers only struggled with was weight and balance, radio communications, power versus economy cruise, right? Because flight sim brief, that's another add-on that's really good for you, Carlos. Find the 737, right? Because it actually spits out power settings, it spits out economy numbers. You can fly Ryanair economy, or you can fly Southwest Airlines economy, which is like firewall forward. um, so those are the top three, and then the second set of areas that sim pilots identified as weaknesses were slow flight, control wheel steering, which is that's a pretty hidden function, descent planning, and then VNAV. That is often a weak area for real world pilots also, is how to set up your aircraft for the appropriate VNAV, to the point where we actually have cheat sheets. Even on the real airplane, we have cheat sheets on what approach you're doing. If you're doing a localizer approach, then this is how you need to set up your VNAV. If you're doing a GPS LPV approach, it's one way. If you're using a GPS LNAV approach, then it's a different way, right? Now you're using vertical speed. If you're doing step downs, or if you're doing a straight ILS, then how do you set, you're just in approach mode. All of these things are important to know, especially if you don't fly regularly in IFR, when you get into your real airplane, so you don't, one, bust an altitude, or two, actually hit something on the ground.
Take a look at pricing. Going back to obviously what we've all spent, or not what we've all spent, but if you were starting fresh now and you had to, I mean, obviously, because Evan, you're in Australia, Armando, you in the US, I'm here in the UK. If you were sort of take a ballpoint figure, a sort of a rough guesstimate now, if you're going to go out now, buy the PC to be able to run these platforms at pretty much their full spec, the software that you'd like, plus the hardware add-ons, the basic sort of hardware add-ons, good ones, good quality add-ons, hardware add-ons that you go, where would you say you're looking at price wise to build a good home sim setup?
Well, I built mine to be the best bang for my buck. I didn't go for the best of anything. Everything I got I researched and got was good, but not too good, so the dollars weren't high. And I was purchasing my graphics card still when the graphics card prices were still crazy and people were still mining with them and all that sort of stuff. So mine is only a RTX 2060, so it's not up there. But it gets the job done. A Ryzen 5 CPU, and old or well loved hardware. So I'd probably, if I did it again, I'd probably up the
graphics,
probably the graphics card.
Yeah,
maybe I'm impressed with the 4070 in terms of what it can handle, but also its power draw is quite low. So one day I might upgrade to that. But yeah, for the moment, I'm happy. I'm toasting. So I wouldn't actually want to spend more than, say, 2,000 Australian dollars to get something. You could buy a fire breathing gaming machine and spend $4,000 on it.
Yeah.
But what would that, let's see, I also don't want to take away from the play money to actually go and fly the real aircraft. So it's a balancing act for me.
What about you? And obviously, Armando, you've just pretty much recently upgraded your tower, and you've brought some various bits of hardware. But what would you say
I might plead the fifth on this one because Meg actually does listen to the show every once in a while. So I don't know. You can go online and figure out how much a MSI gaming computer, the Thrustmaster, and the Honeycomb Bravo. I'm probably right there at 3,000. Also, all said and done. I'm sticking to that story.
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively the same here. To be fair, it does boil down to exactly how much realism you want. You don't have to spend 800, nearly £900 on a throttle quadrant for a 737 like that. And the MCP panels now, I've noticed in the last 2 months, the MCP panels there's 2 or 3 companies who make them now. The prices have gone through the roof. They're some of the retail values now on these MCP panels are in and around £400-500, which whatever that is in US and Australian dollars, but it's phenomenally expensive. But I tell you, for bang for buck, as you say, you can't beat the Cytec stuff. The original Cytec, control yoke, instrument switch panel and stuff like that. They're good quality. They last forever. And the one thing I will say as well on the subject of pricing, if you guys have noticed, obviously since lockdown and the COVID thing, and now we're obviously getting back to normal now, as we all are, hopefully. But the second-hand resale prices now for sim equipment has gone through the roof, and stuff is selling. If I was to put these onto eBay now, say for instance, to sell, I would probably guess I'd get my money back on everything and then some, because people are buying this stuff.
Yeah.
Really. I don't know what the kind of the home simming is like in the US and Australia, but I know here in the UK it's quite a big market for home simming.
So I want to talk about the entry level pricing. If I were to do it again, and again without going full peripherals and everything, an HP Reverb G2 VR set is about $500 on Amazon, and I would go for a good enough laptop that has an NVIDIA GeForce 2000 3000 series graphics card. I would go for the VR goggles at $500, and that Yaman Aero controller, I would go for that. That's the one thing that I kind of wish my setup was a little bit more portable, and that my office I share with my wife. So sometimes I want to like sim, and she's in here working, and I wish I could just kind of go anywhere in the house, throw some VR goggles and headphones on. Or we travel a lot. Sometimes I'm sitting for a week. Next week I leave on Monday on a trip, and then I sit till Sunday, right? So it's a 6-day trip. Well, I kind of wish I had a sim set up, because that's how I spend my time. I listen to podcasts, and then I like to sim to just kind of turn my mind off. So if I were to do it again, I think I would go with a good enough laptop, a VR goggle set, and the Yaman Aero, which I think we're going to have him on the show to talk about that piece of equipment. But that's probably what I would go. And you can do all of that for under 2,000 with a good enough laptop.
Now looking, carry on, Armando.
Sorry, I want to go back to one thing that you said, Carlos, about where is this most popular. I'm going to go back to the Navigraph survey. Believe it or not, the most popular country for flight simming was Norway.
Oh,
in order, the top 5 were Norway, New Zealand, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and the UK. There you
Wow.
go. A little surprising, but that's from the last year's survey, and that's per capita, enthusiasts per capita.
I would never have said that. But you, you haven't.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that at all.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
next time you guys find yourself in Norway, you have a great chance of striking up a conversation about
with a
flight simming with anybody at a random restaurant.
is it a big thing in Australia, Evan? Flight simming. Are there a lot of people you know who do the whole home sim?
I wouldn't say it's a big thing. What I would say is that, to their credit, Microsoft Flight Simulator, when they relaunched in 2020, did open up to a lot more people than they wouldn't have. Like gamers were interested in it, and just general people that were interested in aviation but not in aviation themselves. So they did open up um, the opportunities for many more people.
Hmm. So before we start to wrap things up, I take it you guys heard in the news not so long ago that Microsoft are looking at a Microsoft Flight Sim 2024.
Mm.
Good to hear that.
Yeah. What so looking ahead to the future then, what are you guys as both professional pilots, what are you guys hoping to see from the new iteration of Flight Sim?
Wow, that's I mean, you can't really get much better than Flight Sim 2020.
Aircraft or more aircraft options, possibly?
Yeah, as long as it's backwards compatible, which I'm sure they will make it backwards compatible with all the other stuff, all the add-ons we've already bought. I guess for me, I mean, I think the graphics are there. They're pretty good. I would love some improvements in flight models. But again, that and Carlos, you're sitting here talking to us. Only 27% on the survey of flight simmers had any sort of actual pilot's license. 9% had a private pilots, and there were actually very few professional pilots that actually do flight simming. It's under 5%.
Oh wow.
So I think looking to the future, you're going to have to probably cater to the enthusiast that is much more into those high-end functions like the graphics, the functionality. You probably, if I was Microsoft or Laminar, I would cater to the thing that people are looking for the most, which is probably graphics, not functionality.
Evan?
Ooh,
What would you like to see? I mean, for me, I'd like to see more aircraft types on the on the initial package that you purchase.
yeah, no, I'd like to see a little bit more in depth with avionics stuff. Just fill out some of those features a little more. Um, I think they're going to really go heavily on the scenario-based things. So, you saw sling loads for helicopters and
Mm.
rescue, fire bombing, all sorts of things. So that's really interesting. But I don't think it's going to change the way I use it at the moment. One thing that Microsoft did do for me was get me back into fun flying, just flying around VFR, looking at stuff, going places that I'd never been before. There's a few little flying safaris that I flew around the alpine area in Australia. That was great, good fun. So
Yeah.
I didn't do that previously on other sims. So this sim has allowed that. So maybe some more of that kind of stuff. Take me to interesting places and see it as close it is to reality.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I'll agree with that. I think one of my life bucket list items is to go to Australia and New Zealand and they advertise them on like AOPA. But you can do a basically a flying vacation where you land and you rent an airplane with an instructor, a local instructor, and then you go fly. I would love to go to Australia and New Zealand, and I'm not just saying this because Evan's on the show, but it is on. I've flown in Africa, I've flown all over Europe, I've flown in the Middle East, all over the U.S. The kind of the last thing on my bucket list. Oh, and I grew up in the Caribbean, so my dad and I used to island hop. So I've seen St. Bart's and St. Kitts and St. Thomas and the clear blue waters. The last thing left on my, I guess there's two. I've never flown Alaska. So Alaska bush flying and Australia, New Zealand flying vacations. And both of those are things that I can do pretty accurately on the sim before I actually get there.
Oh, yeah. I've flown around New Zealand in Flight Simulator 2020. It looks stunning.
Yeah. Carlos, when you and I went to the Flying Horseman fly-in.
Oh, yeah.
The Flying Horseman 2020. I actually flew that no less than a dozen times. I flew not just the flight, but that approach into that grass strip. And in Microsoft 2020, the terrain, the elevation data is so accurate that I was able to spot the barn, spot the
tree line.
The tree line, the landings were, working speed, see what it's going to look like from different directions. That combined with my foreflight, and I felt like when you and I landed in there that I had already seen it, at least a dozen times. So it was no surprise as to what it actually looked like.
I think that's one of the most important takeaways that we can say about flight simming is that it opens up the world to people who might not ever or might possibly get the chance to see certain areas of the world. And now with Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 being as good as it is with the visuals and stuff now, it does give people the opportunity to fly in places where they might never ever get the chance to see in great detail as well.
Absolutely.
So there we go. We've had a good chat and discussion about flight simming. I think the thing we can all say is that we all thoroughly enjoy flying from the seats at home, our seats at home. And one of the other important things that we didn't touch on, actually, just thinking about seats, is having a good supporting seat when you're doing flight simming at home, because like me and Evan were saying earlier, Armando, that when you're using flight sim, and I know Evan's the same as me, you do stuff in real time. You don't speed things up. There's no times 3, times 4, times 5 in this flight. If I fly a flight from Stansted to Malta, it's a 3-hour flight, and it's a 3-hour flight in the sim. It's as simple as that. And to have to sit somewhere for 3 hours is, if you've got an uncomfortable chair, it's not a great experience. So I think comfort is another one of those things that if you're going to do home simming, is to have a good, well supporting chair. Would you agree, guys?
I won't show you my chair then.
Yeah, mine's just an IKEA, a basic IKEA. Oh yeah. Oh, look at that. He's a trooper.
Evan is sporting, for those of you listening on the audio podcast, Evan is sporting what can only be described as a very good chair for taking to an air show, for a temporary seating. Yeah,
it's a little folding chair, because when I first built the sim, I had a leg injury and I couldn't carry much stuff, so it needed to be lightweight. So it's what I could carry upstairs, and I'm still using it.
Yeah. I like his I like Evan's commitment to his original setup, right? A 10-year-old joystick and some throttle and a fold out. That's commitment. And that's coming from somebody who just spent 8.5 hours in a Pilates seat, which is not that comfortable.
My word. But
that was a long flight.
On that note, then, guys, we're going to wrap up the show. I'm going to say a big thanks to Evan for joining us on the show for this Flight Sim special. Evan, it's been great to talk to you. It's been great to hear your insight into the world of flight sim and what you think of it. So thanks for coming on.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Armando, thank you for joining us as well. I know it's incredibly early where you are, and you've probably not even had breakfast yet, I'm guessing.
I haven't, and I just got back last night from a trip. But Evan, like Carlos said, it's so nice to see your face. And if you're listening to the audio version, come over to YouTube and check out the video because yeah, I think we've been wanting to do this for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully if it's not your usual cup of tea, then maybe we have introduced some people to the world of flight simming. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
thanks for
And
letting me be on here.
if anyone has any questions or anything, if they want to send some email to you and you can pass it on or whatever, or look me up on social medias, I'm happy to help wherever I can.
Or find you in the chat room on a Friday evening. Sometimes,
Yes.
obviously, the time difference can be challenging for you to join us in the chat room on a Friday night.
In our summertime, it's a little better.
Little being the word there, but no, thanks guys for joining us for the special, and yeah, have a great rest of the weekend, whatever you're up to. So that's it from the Flight Sim Special, Plain Talking UK Flight Sim Special. Have a great weekend. Thanks guys for joining us again, and say goodbye.